Environmental Committee meeting will become called to order. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Flowers. Alderman Vaccaro. Present. Alderwoman Ingracia. Present. Alderwoman Tyus. Present. Alderman Gunther.
Present.
Alderwoman Martin. Present. Chairman Williamson.
Here.
Alderwoman Flowers. 6 yes, present. You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. Today we're going to be discussing the removal of the Confederate monument. We appreciate folks that are coming to speak for and against. And we're going to set the rules at just 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes basically to respond when you elaborate about the monument. We want to keep this meeting at an orderly fashion and kind of get through it. If you get out of order, we're going to ask you to leave. And as you can see, we do have St. Louis Police Finance here and also the City of St. Louis Marshals. So we're going to head and try to conduct this in a, like I said, orderly fashion. We have a few special speakers today. We're going to give them the opportunity to come up and discuss their view on the Confederate monument. And first I'm going to call up the president of the NAACP, Mr. Adolphus Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt, you have the floor.
Leading Mr. Chairman, members of the committee,
Good evening.
I won't be long. Let me say this, though, Mr. Chairman, at least for the record.
Yes, sir.
The fact that we have 3 issues that I think are extremely important to the African American community, and all of them are being provided the public to have some input on them at the same time on the same day is very troubling for me. The fact that I'm here to talk about something that is important to the African American community, and the other part of town, they're talking about the reform of TIF. And then in North St. Louis, they're discussing what we want to see with respect to a new police chief. And so the fact that I'm here sort of speaks to, I guess, what I think is the most pressing priority right now. I think the issue of whether this monument, I think the issue of whether it stays or go has truly been resolved as relates to the artifact in Forest Park. What I did want to speak to, and I appreciate the bill, Mr. Chairman, I did want to speak to one aspect of it that I'm glad to see in it. We support the bill in its entirety. We think it is an appropriate piece of legislation at the appropriate time. We think it addresses the appropriate issues, and it does it in a way that the city can and should move. The one thing that I find more interesting in the bill than anything else is that it is at least providing for any artifact of this nature that is owned by the city, that if the donator does not want to reclaim it or have the ability financially to take it back, that it be donated if necessary to an appropriate party that wants to accept it. That is a very extremely important part of this particular piece of legislation, only because, you know, for the past few months or even longer, City of St. Louis has enough problems, public relation-wise and otherwise, and to see some of the rancor and the discord going on between pro and against, and in some cases, minorities against non-minorities, does not, I think, put the city in the greatest light, and I think it gives a inference that the racial division in the city is not only great, but in some cases hostile, and I just don't think that's a total reflection of the city of St. Louis. Which brings me to the point is that, you know, I began to do some research and actually tried to figure out why are we still wrestling with this issue since some months ago there was a decision made to remove it. There were proposals sent out. Those proposals received responses, and here we are, you know, over a year later, still wrestling with this, and in some cases talking about using public dollars. As I got more involved and got hold of some of the documents, and especially was very interested in the document from the Missouri Civil War Museum, that basically, let's just be clear that not only did they agree to accept it, but my indication, my conversation with them, they didn't need any dollars from the city in order to claim it, that the issue that became the sticking point, from my, at least from my understanding, was the inability for the museum to satisfy the city with respect to a request to be told when and how they would interpret and display the work in the future. And I'm saying in the future, I guess that's in infinity. And I don't think any institution that has a mission of preserving art and history can tell anyone each and every time in exact detail how they will display a piece of art or an artifact going forward. So I think the language in here precludes that from happening. I don't know if it needs to be strong. I don't know if the sponsor's interested in making it even stronger, but the fact is that I think that these items, wherever they may be, let's be clear, I don't think they deserve to be desecrated by individuals based on their difference of opinion. I don't think they should be vandalized. I don't think they should be treated with any disregard other than the city making a decision, which is making in this ordinance, that it no longer fits in with what the city wants to display as a part of its public art. And I think the city has the right to do that. I appreciate the bill. I hope that this committee passes the bill and it goes on to the full board and the board does the same. And that concludes basically what I had to say, Mr. Chairman. If there were any questions from you and a member of the committee, I have no problem with responding to them.
Sure, I appreciate that. I had one question. Just wanted to clarify, when you mentioned the History Museum, I guess it's in Jefferson Barracks. So exactly what are you saying? They were willing to dismantle the monument and move it to their museum without a cost to the city of St. Louis?
From my discussions with them, not only were they willing to do it, but the proposal that the committee sent out to them and others and asking them, would they be willing to take the art? The proposal in itself says that, item number 7 says, the budget in response to this RFP should not include costs associated with moving or reinstalling the monument. The cost will be separately assessed by the committee. So anybody responding to this particular RFP, I don't know why they will respond with costs of dismantling and removing when the proposal asked them not to, and basically says that is something that the city was going to make some determination on. And this is
That's correct.
this comes from the document that the committee sent out to individuals they thought may be interested in receiving this particular monument.
Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, we'll go down the line. We have Alderwoman Flowers. Do you have any questions?
No questions.
All right, Alderwoman. Alderman Vaccaro?
Not so much a question. I agree with, first off, there shouldn't be 3 meetings going on. I also, and of course, I wouldn't even mind getting your opinion. We're here tonight to get people whether they're interested in taking something down or not taking something down. We're talking about not using public money, but today, they're taking it down, they're using public money, they took the sign down. All the things that we're here tonight, it's almost like asking people to come to something that, like you said at the beginning, it seems like a foregone conclusion. Why, makes you wonder why we're having a public meeting on something that, no matter what everybody's got to say, has no say in it.
Well, I think, Alderman, my interpretation of this piece of legislation, one is that from what I've gathered from the press as relates to the activities that are going on with respect to the monument today, was one, the removal of the cap in order for those to, with the expertise, to evaluate its structure, substructure, and to ascertain a proper way of dismantling it so that they could assess how they would do it, what it would cost, timetable, and things of that nature. So it has not been removed. It has been dismantled partially. And then two, unless I'm reading the bill wrong, this bill basically provides for several things. One, that if any artifacts of this nature of any kind that are in the possession of the city and not in a museum and in a public park, and I guess we should include public right-of-way, but at minimum in a public park, and if there are any streets named for such that's in a public park, that one, they should be removed, and two, the names ought to be changed, and then three, this specific monument and the right-of-way of it in the park is to be renamed for Scott Joplin. That's what I thought this piece of legislation does. I didn't think.
Well, so there are no other, in any of the other parks are named, because I did ask, and I assume the sponsor probably also went through that, but so this is it.
Yeah, and you know,
I take your word for
if
it.
the monument had been removed last week, we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
But they're-
So
they're-
all of a sudden.
They are taking it apart today, whether or
Right,
not,
and they're
I must have
dismantling it, and what the mayor tells me is she told me yesterday night, last night, that they are gonna dismantle the monument and remove it. Now, she said it's gonna take approximately 2 weeks to have it done. It's 14 pieces of the stone fixture of the monument, which is made of stone. So they have to dismantle it. Not only that, when they transport that stone, the heaviest stone is worth, I mean, it weighs 40 tons. So they have to navigate through the city in highways or wherever they're taking it, which we still don't know, of the overpasses and the bridge to make sure that those bridges and overpasses can handle that tonnage. So it's going to take a couple of weeks, is what she told me, but it is being removed. She also mentioned to me that she's getting it removed through private funds. So that's what she told me.
well, I'm just saying, we're here to ask, or at least
Right.
pretend to ask,
Well, yeah,
at this
and-
point, whether or not people feel one way or the other.
Yeah, we're here and we're going
And
to do that.
Whenever the Board of Aldermen, in my opinion, our authority gets overstepped, I think we get
understand.
embarrassed. And
Mr. Chairman, I would close by saying this in response to the Alderman. One thing I do appreciate the fact that the board has provided for a formal, civilized forum for this discussion to take place, because this discussion has been going on our streets and in our park, and even worse, in my opinion, is, you know, I was out there, what was it, last Saturday or Sunday, and 25 police officers keeping people apart who want to have this debate and babysitting the monument. Can you imagine and when I got there, the second shift of police officers that got on. So if you can imagine for 12 to 14 hours, 20, 25 police officers, and, you know, I just think that, I thought it was a waste of public dollars.
And I agree with that, but I also know that there's a lot of people that have called me that don't want to see it down. But again, either way, we're here to listen, at least my understanding is, we're here to listen to the people, whether or not they want this to stay or go.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what we say. We could vote today that it stays, we could vote today that it goes. It's going, and it's completely went around the Board of Aldermen, which is the proper way that you're supposed to handle stuff. I don't even know why we have a Board of Aldermen if the mayor's going to make all these decisions. It doesn't, that's where my problem really starts to come in.
Alderman,
is
that's a
that
separate bill.
It's not a separate bill.
I'm
It's wrong to ask people to take time out of their day to come up here to pretend that we're actually going to listen to them.
And you make a good point, Alderman. We appreciate that because I understand what he's saying. You know, sometimes we do get overlooked at the Board of Aldermen, and I'm glad that the monument's coming down, but at the same time, it's a due process is what he's saying, and it really happened the wrong way. If it was been some kind of communication along with the mayor's office and the Board of Aldermen to remove the monument, then we probably could have handled the situation differently.
Mr. Chairman, I simply say that the mayor inherited this.
Right, she did.
And I'm appreciated that
I
at the
appreciate it, too.
15 months, it is happening. So,
Right.
I mean, and that's being selfish, but it is what it is.
Right, and I appreciate her getting it down, you know, expediently. We really do. She's doing a great job of that. So no, I don't have a problem with that at all. Okay, we'll go down the line to see if anybody else has any questions. Alderwoman Gracia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here this evening. Can you explain, Alderman Kennedy did a really nice job in committee last week. I think my mic's off, sorry.
Well,
Yeah,
you want to get here? Here, come over here. I'll sit
it's
down.
not really that impactful of a statement. So last week in committee, Alderman Kennedy sort of very eloquently touched on the significance of removing the monument from Forest Park, as well as renaming Confederate Drive after Scott Joplin. Can you expound on that and just explain the significance that you think it has to the African-American
I
community?
won't compete with Alderman Kennedy.
No one, no one can.
No one
can.
does it better. But in short, I would say, in spite of history, right now, that monument has become the most toxic racial division, whatever you want to call it, in the city of St. Louis, and is attracting people. When I was there the other day, it was people from as far as, I think they said it was from Potosi. And they're rallying around it in the city of St. Louis, some openly carrying weapons, many I know concealed and carrying weapons, and at each other's throat. So if for no other reason, it demonstrates that, one, how toxic it is, and that anything that toxic, if it was a vacant building, we would board it up and be done with it. And so I would do that. Alderman Kennedy is here, and we may have him to do what it is he do, but I don't want to do that, Alderwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt.
Sure. And Terry, quit putting me on the spot.
All right, thank you, Alderwoman. Okay, Alderwoman Tyus, do you have any questions? Okay. Alderman Gunther? No questions. Okay. Alderwoman Martin? Okay, very good. All right, yes, ma'am. Okay, go ahead,
In
Alderwoman.
response to Alderman Carroll's question, the only thing I really know about this is what I've read in the paper, seen on TV, and pretty much 90% read on Twitter. And I think if we would have known what was going on today, or what was transpiring yesterday, today, and I don't know if the communication didn't happen between the sponsor of the bill, the chairman of the committee, or however that was, we probably wouldn't have a hearing tonight. Tonight, the importance of is to hear everyone's opinion as to why they want it to go, or why they don't want it to go. And even though this bill this issue has been before us for some time, I want to hear people's reason, whether I agree with them or I don't. So, I don't think it's really about someone going around us or behind us. We're here to hear what the public has to say and what we've been seeing, and to be able to comment and ask questions, possibly why people feel the way they do. I may not have a question as to anyone's opinion as how they feel, whether it should stay or to go. But I do wish I could be at the meeting dealing with the new police chief tonight and how we're going to figure that out. But I have a duty on this committee to be here, as well as I have a duty to be on the HUD's committee, which I'm not there. So I want to hear what's going on tonight so I can put to rest in my mind that we heard what the people in the public had to say. The sponsor of the bill wanted that to be had tonight, whether she agreed or she didn't agree. So, I appreciate the process. And I think we're not going to take a vote tonight. We're going to have another committee meeting. So tonight is just for the public. And I appreciate your comments.
Okay, thank you, Alderwoman. All right, we appreciate it, Mr. Pruitt. Would you like to close? Any closing statements?
Hey, at minimum, when it's gone, we still have the Confederate Drive, and I think this bill addresses it. So
Yes, sir.
it does have purpose.
Right, it does. And we really appreciate that. And that's a good segue into Alderman Terry Kennedy, who's going to explain why the Confederate Road will be renamed in Scott Joplin. So we'd like to have Alderman Terry Kennedy take the floor.
And I'll let you know about the chief.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Mr. Pruitt. Welcome, Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First, I'd like to thank the sponsor for coming forward with this bill and raising this issue. I am the second alderman here with seniority. It was common for the Board of Aldermen years ago to have evening meetings so that the public could be able to attend and to make testimony. I think it's an important action that we've gone back to some of these. It gives people the opportunity to not have to just look at television, but to be able to see and feel and get the feel of the total energy and vibe of a particular meeting that you sometimes cannot get when it's just broadcast. We thought it important enough that we began to have evening meetings like this with the Ways and Means Committee, and we started that when I became chair of Ways and Means, and we found it to be quite both informative and essential. I was taught by my instructors that history provides us two things. It provides us information and inspiration. Information, of course, are the facts, the datas, the times, the individuals who were involved in making these significant actions. And inspiration, which for some people may be a little bit more intangible, but just as powerful, if not more powerful. It can encourage us to make changes for the better. It can encourage us to reach higher heights. It can encourage us to become a greater and more kind and considerate community. And so we're here to talk a little bit about history. The sponsor of the bill came forward and asked my opinion about renaming the street, and I said, sure, we should do that. And I recommended Scott Joplin. Well, people say, what, Scott Joplin? Well, we have to go back a little bit in history and understand. In 1893, there was a world exposition called the Columbian Exposition that was held in Chicago. The musical elite of Chicago forced European classical music at this exhibition. And they said that the exhibition was a crashing failure. Nobody wanted to come and sit up there and listen to chamber music. And so then the organizers of the Louisiana Exposition, the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, studied that, even spoke to the organizers, and made the decision to try to have more popular music. And the cutting-edge music of 1904, and in 1904, St. Louis was recorded as the fourth largest city in the country. The popular music of that day, the cutting-edge music of that day was ragtime. Its father or originator or one of its most important contributors to that genre of music we know was Scott Joplin. So ragtime music was played abundantly at the 1904 World's Fair. Most people are not aware of that. Scott Joplin, its author and one of its major contributors, however, being African American, was not allowed to play his ragtime music at the World's Fair. There were other bands like Sousa's band, John Philip Sousa, and these types of bands that had played these ragtime songs and these syncopated rhythms in compositions that they did, but Scott Joplin himself and these other African American composers were unable to do it. There have been some historians that have argued back and forth that perhaps he did because he came back with one song called The Cascades, which was inspired by the Cascades at the World's Fair, but there is no documentation. And they have all of the various records. They have all of the programs. They have all of the schedules, and Scott Joplin's name is not on one of them. So it is pretty clear by the historical documentation that he himself did not play. I did not learn that story by reading it in a book or from a history class. My grandfather, my mother's father, was born 1883. He was 21 years old when the World's Fair took place. We lived with him till he passed in 1973 after I gotten out of high school. He told us around the kitchen table about what it was like leaving this part of the eastern part of the city and taking either the horse and buggy or the trolley out to the World's Fair and being able to walk around it and seeing. He pointed out that then, he said they played a lot of ragtime, but Scott Joplin was only able to play his music at the various taverns that were around the World's Fair. Most are not aware that that type of music, that ragtime, was a popular music at the 1904 World's Fair, which is the site of Forest Park. And so then when the sponsor of the bill asked my opinion, I thought it would be fitting to at least recognize the author of the popular music at the St. Louis World's Fair that helped draw all the people into the World's Fair, because people were really coming to hear the cutting edge music, as people always like to hear new things, came because of that music, but the authors of that music were unable to play themselves at the World's Fair. So he thought it would be appropriate to rename either Confederate Drive or at least some other street in Forest Park with that name in honor of these individuals that made such a contribution to both the World's Fair and the fabric of the city of St. Louis. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. We'll go online and see if any aldermen have any question. Okay. Alderwoman Flowers? No question. Okay. Alderman Vaccaro? Okay. Alderwoman Ingracia? Alderwoman Taz? Alderman Gunther?
No questions.
Alderwoman Morton? Okay, very good. All right, we really appreciate you coming in and speaking to us and letting us know the rich history, of Scott Joplin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
All right, thank you. Okay, very good. We do have Mrs. Williams. Are you here to speak, Mrs. Williams, on? She's going to speak with you? Okay, all right. All right, good enough. Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and start to hear from the public. First person I'm going to call up will be, I guess is, can't quite make the name out. Is it Elsa Harris or Harris? And if I pronounce your name wrong, I apologize. I'm just trying to read it the best way I know how.
Hergel.
Hergel? Okay.
Yeah, German.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
I hated to be first, but I wrote a short note email to Mayor Clusen last night. I had some cautionary ideas. I understand that the statue is like a burr in your shoe, and when I first found it there in Forest Park, I was totally amazed. But it has a history. To remove it without solving some of the problems that it has brought out on all sides, I think will do two very negative things. One, it will put every statue that was put on or put in by the union, and worse than that, every mention of Dr. King, his road, his street, or other people who have fought for civil rights will be put in danger. Monuments to them, we don't have the police to guard every monument. And I hate to say it, but there are crazies out there who will watch this Confederate monument go down and decide it's a declaration of war and that they have to fight by taking down other monuments. And in that way, The second thing is it won't relieve the tensions. It'll just heighten them. I'm afraid we're trying to brush something under the rug that's not going to be brushed under the rug. We need to talk things out. And I have a proposal. Rather than spending $250,000 to put up another, or to take down a monument, that we put up a monument to the black troops who were stationed in Fairgrounds Park in 1863, the first Missouri troops, black troops that were here. They were stationed there.
Were they
and I
Confederate
didn't-
troops or were they Union troops?
I'm sorry?
Were they Confederate or Union?
I'm hard of hearing.
Were they Confederate troops or
Oh,
Union
no,
troops?
They were Union.
Okay,
These
just
were
wanna
these
clarify.
were slaves that were set free
Okay.
and that were brought into the city and that were trained there. And nobody knows about it. I didn't know about it until I began researching this about, a while back. And it would be great to let people know. These statues bring up things, and people should know.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, well, thank you for coming. Any members have any questions of Mrs. Hersey? Go
Just
ahead.
one. I would ask, as everybody comes up, your opinion on, since the statue is a foregone conclusion, doesn't matter what you have to say, how you feel about the Scott Joplin Drive. I guess
think
that's
that's a great
something that
idea.
we can really,
I think, I did not know that he was not participating in the World's Fair, but I think that's a great idea.
see, and that's something that at least we can listen and act on, so. So you would be in favor of changing Confederate Drive, which they took the sign down already, so.
Yeah.
You would be in favor of changing it
I
to Scott Joplin?
think that the name needs to be changed to something else, yes.
Okay, and I wouldn't mind getting other opinions. That one we can actually act on.
All right, anybody else? Any questions? We thank you.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Are you a city resident by any chance?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jennifer Kovar, welcome you to come up, please.
I'm a city resident, and I am in favor of the removal of the Confederate monument and the renaming of Confederate Drive to whatever seems appropriate. And I just wanted to mention that you might hear from people opposing the removal that this is a part of history, and it is. White supremacy is very much rooted in our history in St. Louis and in the United States, but I don't want to revere it. I want to dismantle it. So somebody said earlier that if we remove it, it will be possibly a declaration of war. The war has already been going on. So we have to end it at some point with a reparative solution. This is just a very symbolic, small effort for our city. So non-taxpayer dollars should be used for its removal. And let's move on and deal with the bigger issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Any members have any questions? Mrs. Kovar? All right, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Next speaker will be Neil Thompson. So that's done.
Good evening,
Good evening.
neighbors, brothers and sisters. I'm a preacher man. My name is Neil Thompson. I've been living in St. Louis since I was 9 years old. And I become a ward of the state of Missouri when I was 10 years old. And I was basically raised as a black child here in the city of St. Louis. And I'd become a street preacher 29 years ago because I know what racial profiling is. And enough is enough. We need to drop this egg and leave it alone. What happened to our constitutional rights of the people run this country and run their community and run their cities and towns. Why didn't we get a vote or any say-so in this through voting and asking who wants it up, who wants it down? And we're spending a lot of money on this. Ain't there better things to do with our money than spend it on such petty things that's this don't add up to a hill of beans? You're making a mountain out of a molehill, as they say it. And I just don't feel that it's right that this goes on. And anybody that damages these monuments should be arrested and put in jail for destruction of city property, state property. Let the whole nation vote on this. It ain't just got to be the state of Missouri. Let the whole nation vote on all these monuments around the United States. Or in the state of Missouri. Let that happen there. But we got to put an end to all this black and white stuff and this Muslim and Christian stuff, because that's not what it's about. The trouble in America is the black and white thing, and the sinners and the righteous weren't meant to live together. We need to separate ourselves from one another. Nobody should be forced to live anywhere they don't want to live. Birds of a feather flock together. Don't force your way of life on me. I don't want to force God, Jesus, and church on nobody. So we need to go our own ways or start ruling our states, because each state basically is its own country. You adopt the laws and the lifestyle that you want to live in that state through the politics. But we have to have a chance to vote. That's what I believe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Thompson? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, so you got a question?
Other than, how do you feel about changing the street name to Scott Joplin Drive? I'm just curious. That's the one
No,
thing
I
that
don't
we
think they
might
should
have.
change the name neither.
Okay.
I don't think they should change anything that's going on in this country. If you want to put something up to make you happy, put something up that makes you happy. There's a lot of signs and streets and names that people didn't get to vote on them neither. Do we want this street here? Do we want that to be named? Do we want that bridge to be named this or that? Let the people.
I'm
Right.
just was more looking, just kind
Right.
of getting an overall opinion.
Right, I don't know all about all this stuff. I'm not an educated man. I don't have all this knowledge of what history means and all that, but I do know that we need to put an end to all this racial stuff, because the whole world has their eyes on St. Louis.
Yes, sir.
Yes, over Michael Brown and Ferguson. Now we done showed them how bad, mean, and fed up and crazy and fed up with this going on in the world. Now we need to show them how good, righteous, godly, and holy we can be and clean St. Louis up and make St. Louis the most beautiful city in America. And then 2 million people would move back to the city of St. Louis if we would stop all this littering, tearing up, and acting crazy. This craziness ain't getting us nowhere but 6 foot under or in the penitentiary.
Okay.
But they need to give us jobs.
Thanks,
know.
Mr. Thompson.
I
We
could
really
talk. I
appreciate
could talk for 6 straight hours about the whole 9 yards.
Yes,
but
sir. Well, we thank you for
Thank
coming
you for
today.
the chance to speak. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
God bless you in Jesus Christ's name.
Amen. Okay, we have Laura Duncan. Ms. Duncan, you're welcome to speak.
Good evening. Thank you for having this public. I can understand why this is contention, because it is Confederate. I get that. It is part of one of the most horrific acts this nation has ever done. And the only thing that I'm a little concerned about is that if this bill goes through, which the top of the statue has already been cut off, my question to you is, are we only going to stick with the things that are Confederate, or are we going to take down the statue of Pierre Laclede that I just passed on the way here? He built Laclede's Landing with slaves. What are we going to do about Shaw's Garden? That was all built by slaves. but Shaw's Garden is a good tax revenue. Where is it going to stop? St. Louis University, I looked up the St. Louis City tax records, and slaves were taxable. That would shock you. And I just want to know, how far are we willing to go? Is this the political trend that we're on? Because this city is doing it with one of many. Thank you.
Any questions?
It's the same one.
Well, I'm sure she,
It's the same one, and it has to do with renaming of the street. Would you be for or against the renaming of the street? It has nothing to do with the statue, but I'm just asking, I'm just curious.
It's irrelevant in the spectrum of what I see.
Okay, I'm just curious.
okay. Well, thank you for coming in. I guess we understand your point, but when you have a monument that's sitting in one of the largest parks, not only in the United States, but, I mean, not only in the city of St. Louis, but one of the largest parks within the United States, that reminds you of racism, I think is one of the main reasons that we're removing it. Just like the sponsor had mentioned some time ago, you know, if you had a SWAT sticker or a Hitler statue somewhere, especially close to a Jewish community, I guarantee you it wouldn't last too long. So this is a monument that just reminds African Americans of racism. And there's nothing we can do. We can't erase what happened back in 1862, before then, a little after, and even in 1914 when they placed the monument there. All we can do today is try to improve the way of life of trying to subdue and get along with all nationalities. But when you kind of go to the park and you have African Americans living close to the park, living throughout the whole city of St. Louis and even in the county that frequent Forest Park, and when you see that, you know, it's kind of disheartening to us and even other nationalities. So that's the reason I think that we would like to see it removed. But we can't erase history. Like you said, you know, Pierre Leclerc, slave owner. George Washington, our president, slave owner. We can go on and on and on. So this is just kind of a symbol that I think we can at least move it out the way and try to get along throughout our future. Okay? Thank you. All right, our next speaker will be, I think it's Terry Powers.
Thank you. I am the Democratic Committee woman from the 24th Ward. I've noticed that although my alderman had signed to sponsor, he's not here, and several other people are not here. Yes. I'm wishing that Lyda Cruson could be here because I have questions. And it's about money and priorities. And Frank, I hope you know my heart. I know that Sam Moore knows it. I know that Joe Vaccaro knows it. I care very much about what's happening in the city. I've lived here my entire life. The plot of land that we lived on in the Fox Park neighborhood as a child, my older brother's a history buff, particularly the Civil War, and he figured that Union troops were executed by Confederates in our backyard. Pretty powerful stuff. But knowing that this country of ours was founded on slavery, I would be here tonight to argue for I can't even say the word, reparations, because our country's been built on the backs of blacks, of slaves who were taken from their homeland, stripped of their culture, stripped of their freedom, not allowed to marry, not allowed to read, so on and so forth. And it's a pretty ugly history, and I agree with that. But I would like to know, first of all, what is the cost of dismantling this statue, this monument, And how are we paying for it? I understand that someone decided to have a GoFundMe account. I don't know how much has been raised, and I don't know how much is coming out of taxes. And that's where I have an issue, because it's been less than a week since Kim Gardner, our prosecuting attorney, was on TV saying, I need 700,000. And she was talking about being able to hire staff so that our constituents accused of crime could get a speedy trial rather than languishing at the workhouse over on Hall Street that's dilapidated, needs air conditioning just to be humane. I can imagine as we're looking at the weather being in the 90s, they're looking at no escape from being in 100-degree plus temperature in that old brick building. When 7-year-olds are shot and killed, and there's a 5-year-old left, and I wonder how much memory she will have of her parents and her older sister, and who will care for her and keep her out of harm's way. That matters more to me than the monument. I'm sorry, it matters. Those Black lives matter. I don't want to hear of another Kajimi Powell who needed medical crisis intervention training. And I want a police chief who responds. And a trickle-down effect that our officers are going to de-escalate and use those de-escalation tactics of crisis intervention training to de-escalate situations rather than shoot.
Agree.
There's so many problems in this city, and I grieve, and sometimes I just kind of curl up in a ball and want to suck my thumb because I hurt so much, and I don't have buckets of money to throw at problems. But what are our priorities? 700,000, and she's only talking about bringing on more prosecutors so they can speed those cases through. Somebody's arrested and they can't afford a bond and they go over on Hall Street. They've lost a place to live, they've lost a job if they had one, they're gonna lose family support, they may lose a marriage. And then a year later, guilty time served, or oops, not guilty.
And we understand your point, kind of run over time.
Well, I
Appreciate
still,
the
I want to hear the cost,
Well,
and
yeah,
where's
now-
it coming from?
Well, you know, what they tell us is $130,000 to have it removed. Now, that's the figure that the Parks Director gave us. Now, I know Tashara Jones, the treasurer, she had a GoFundMe account. She raised about approximately $20,000. The mayor, Lyda Cruzen, I'm not sure exactly what she raised, but she told me that she did raise some private funds. I don't know the amount.
She
So-
couldn't find the money for the prosecuting attorney's office. We can't find money to air
Understand.
condition Hall Street. We can't find money for after-school programs, recreation programs, things to grab a hold of little kids.
Right. And maybe you ought to come back to a public safety meeting because you bring up some very good issues, and those issues need to be discussed and ironed out. But kind of running short on time, Committee Woman. So
Well, and
if
I
we
want to
just need go
propose
ahead and
things
move on.
like Langston Hughes poetry being put up.
Well, I understand. It's a good point.
My heart is with you, but when we don't have the money in the budget, what are our priorities? And we're number one in terms of murder.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
I have a statement.
You have a statement?
I do.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Alderwoman.
Ms. Powers, when you just bring up those situations, I'm the person sitting here who used to be a public defender that went to the workhouse at all. You know I'm an attorney, we know each other, and I was a public defender. I spent much of my time at the workhouse, okay? I also, before I was gerrymandered, when I was back in 2001, I actually opened up the workhouse and took the press in it back then and took a tour through all of the things. So you can't tell me what I don't already know, because I've known that, and I practice in all my clients. I have to say, exactly. I also was the chair of public safety when we built the new Justice Center. So I am aware of the things that you're talking about. What I want you to understand is that we can multitask, and doing more than one thing does not take away necessarily from the other. The reason that I sponsored this legislation is because I wanted to know those same questions, and so I wanted a means to be able to get at that. How much money is being spent? Where is it being spent? Let's make a law that says we can't spend public money. So I intend to follow up and continue to find out where the mayor is getting her money. If it is private funds, I want to know who it's from, and this type of legislation is the proper way to find that out. That's what I wanted you to know. Okay, and I will. Okay, so this is exactly. So mine was to make sure that my bill says no public funds, and then it sets up a committee of the mayor, the president of the board, the comptroller, and the treasurer, and the chair of parks to raise private funds. And I don't have a problem with people raising private funds for this. So, but it says when we raise these private funds, then I want to be able to tell the public where we got these private funds for and report back. So I am not trying to be secretive. That is not my intent. It is to make it more open so that everyone feels comfortable. I will provide you one. I'll email you one this evening. Is that okay? That would be wonderful. All right. Mm-hmm.
Just,
Okay. Alderman Vaccaro.
just a very quick comment. You're aware that we went through the prison, or the jails. We passed a bill from the Board of Aldermen that would have started to correct the problem, and the mayor vetoed it. And Mayor Slay vetoed it. Yeah, and now we're having to start all over. But we did go through the workhouse, and it is and has a huge amount of problem. Be discussed in public safety, which we are, because that bill's coming back up, and we're working on it again now.
Okay. Thank you. James Smith, is that? Okay.
Actually, yeah, I'm Jim Schmerald, and
Okay, Jim Schmerald. I apologize. It looks like-
And first time I'm speaking with you guys, and I just want to make sure that the city is going to be efficiently spending their money properly. The city doesn't have enough money to even take care of their own offices. You know, I mean, it'd be nice to have new carpet here, but I want to see more police officers on the streets. I want the cops to get raises, and I think that it's very rare that I never see any police. You know, nobody gets tickets. Stop signs are blown off. People who speeds down my street, they go 50 miles per hour. You know, police officers are able to give tickets, then they can get raises. A lot of the money goes to the schools, and we need more money for the cops. And I want North St. Louis to get taken care of. I care about everybody. I treat everyone exactly the same. My son, he's 18 years old. Even when he was 4 years old, he'd play with everybody. You know, he treats everyone the same as, you know, and I think everyone should learn. We should all, he wants to be a school teacher. He's going to go to school in the fall, and then he wants to be a history teacher. So I told my son, you know, like, if you feel that something doesn't pertain to class, you rip that page out in history. You know, I think we should learn about history, but not dwell on it. I think we should treat everyone the same. Everyone all have the same blood. Everyone bleeds the same. Everyone dies the same. Just be friends with everybody. And it breaks my heart when a 7-year-old child, you know, all he wants to do is play, and he gets killed. He gets shot in the head. That's getting extremely popular today. I just want, you know, the killings to stop. That's more important than anything. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll see if anybody have any questions. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. On the naming the street, I go along with renaming the street.
Okay. Anybody got any questions, Mr. Earl? Okay. Thank you for coming, sir. We appreciate it, and you're right. We are working tirelessly trying to come up with some creative funding so we can keep our police department intact, and not only that, become more competitive when it comes to salary. They're kind of looking at a Proposition P and also maybe some payroll tax increase. So, as you know, with the city of St. Louis, the problems that we're having, we are losing some of our police officers because of the lack of salary, and a lot of them are leaving, going to other municipalities. So we are aware that the mayor is working on it, and I think the Ways and Means members are also working on it. So hopefully we can collectively come up with something so we can kind of stop the bleeding of the city of St. Louis. But not only that, we also need to assure to raise money to put funds on the front end. And what I mean by that is to invest in our communities, especially with young families and kids in education, you know, especially when it comes to summer job, will alleviate some of this crime too also. So again, thank you, and point very well taken. Next speaker will be, is it Timothy Herzl?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Alderman Kennedy spoke of history consisting of facts and data and also inspiration. So let me speak to you today of what that monument in Forest Park did to me, a white male, when I moved into St. Louis. I was enjoying Forest Park, and I was enjoying the many monuments and plaques presented there and the history, Franz Siegel's statue, Francis Blair. Then I saw this monument, grand and tall, commemorating the Confederate dead. And I realized that people mourned their dead on both sides of that war, and I thought, okay, that's fine. Then I read a piece of data. The date that that monument was erected was 1914. My grandfather fought in the war to end all wars in that same decade. In this decade, we had internal combustion engines, heavier than air flight. It was the dawn of the modern era that I live in today. The grandsons and granddaughters of the people who erected that monument are my colleagues at work, my compatriots at church, my neighbors. So when I saw that monument, I sat up straight, my eyes widened, and I looked over both shoulders. And I paid attention to what was happening in the city of St. Louis. And I saw the redlining. I saw that different regions received different treatment in terms of presence of police officers and repair of streets. That monument inspired me to be aware, to be awake, to watch, to re-engage in the struggle between freedom and oppression. I am afraid that if we remove it, it will be easy to forget. It will be very easy for my sons or my granddaughters to not know what has been going on in this city. I'm afraid if we move it elsewhere and we hide it, we will not confront. I want it in my face, so I am aware. I want it to be a lightning rod, so we discuss these issues. And when we arrive at a point in time when we have a vibrant city of diverse background working together in friendship for our common good, then I can look at this monument and feel proud about how far we have come. In the meantime, it energizes me. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anyone have any questions of Mr. Herzl? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
To the alderman over here, as far as Scott Joplin, that was a very eloquent description by Alderman Kennedy about the reasons for that name. It's inspiring, and I like the idea very much, especially at the foot of this monument.
Just so you know, that was one of two proposals that were given us. One was change it to Scott Joplin. The other one, since it's such a small drive, they were talking about just leveling it and make it grassy there. And
Yeah,
have no
we're going to
drive
address
there.
all that pretty much later on.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that was a two.
The sponsor will elaborate a little later on once we get through the public hearing. Okay. Austin Skinner? Or Shima? Okay. Skinner? Okay.
No, not related to Leonard. Thanks for having me. My name is Austin Skinner, and I work for a statewide nonprofit organization that works in the fields of the humanities and history. And I think it's regrettable that Mayor Krewson has decided to go it alone on this. I think, frankly, we're missing an opportunity for a very important discussion. I think all sides could hear people on this. And there were many players in the fields of education, humanities, history, all sorts of fields that were ready to talk about this from every side of it. And it's unfortunate to me because when you go it alone like that, not only are you subverting the democratic process here, but you turn it into a flashpoint. And when you turn it into a flashpoint, you bring out the extremes on either side. So you've got the people defacing the monument, you've got the people waving the Confederate flag, and it just becomes ugly in a way that's not helpful at all, frankly, to this entire debate. So I will say that I absolutely support the Scott Joplin renaming. That last little bit adds an interesting twist as to whether or not, it's going to be turned into a green knoll anyway. I don't know, but I do support the naming of that. I would also just like to say that I support this bill because it does seem a foregone conclusion that the mayor's decided it's already in the progress of coming down. So in that fact, I support it, and I frankly like that it's upfront about the need to have this go somewhere where it can be publicly appreciated and stand in the full context of its history. It seems to me the mayor continues to skirt that issue in all of her public statements on this monument. And frankly, that's going counter to Mayor Slay's original commission that said it needed to be displayed in full context of its history with interpretive panels and be re-erected in the public. What is most troublesome to me is this idea of indefinite storage. Once it goes away, there will not be another great coming to have it put somewhere else. These things are important. They remind us where we've been, where we're going. We need to have this somewhere, frankly. So that's all I'd have to say about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Skinner. Alderman?
First up, I agree with just about all you said. And here it's going to bring out a lot of emotions and feelings. And literally received probably at least 100 phone calls a day, if not more. And all pretty much one-sided that don't want to see that taken down. And the amount of people that have called me and said, I'm never going to vote Democrat again. I'm going to put a Confederate flag outside my house. I was amazed. And I think what you're going to see in some areas, at least if everybody's true to what they were telling me today, it's just going to further divide the city when we need to think about how we come together, not divide. And I wasn't even going to bring all that up, but it is. I agree. At a time that we don't need divisive stuff, and we need to be able to come together, you're going to see people that feel strongly about this now flying a Confederate flag outside their house. I'm just saying.
If I may add one further thing to that. I would also just like to say that someone did come to the table, as the gentleman from the NAACP mentioned. The Missouri Civil War Museum is the only respondent to that RFP, and Mayor Krewson's office has not taken that seriously in any public statement that has come out. We need to know why. I suppose we're waiting on the plan to come out sometime this month, but be leery of indefinite storage.
All right. Anyone else? Yes, Alderwoman.
So, again, I'm the sponsor of the bill, and the reason I sponsored it is because just because she says indefinite storage, if we come up with a plan and it's in our ordinance, unless she vetoes it, which is her right, then we have an alternate. Without it, we don't have anything. I don't agree with her unilaterally taking it down because she and I started this dance 2 years ago when she was the alderperson of the 28th Ward, and she sponsored a bill to just rename Confederate Drive, and I brought it up at that time. It was in the newspapers. I have an article, if you would like it, saying that we need to look at a more holistically approach to this, okay? So I think that the mayor knows that there is a legislative branch, which we are. She knows the 3 branches of government, and I do want it down. So, but I do believe that the process is equally important, and I did ask the chair if he would have a meeting. I've spoken to enough aldermen. I think I have the majority, but I still think that people have a right to have a conversation. And so if we come up with a good enough ordinance, maybe it won't be indefinitely stored. And I meant to, and I didn't, but I will tomorrow, this weekend, I will go out and have a conversation with the people to find out what the problems were, because maybe we can amend this bill to address whatever the problems were. I agree with the Mr. Pruitt from the NAACP. It's hard to tell a museum how they want to do something forever. And one of the things, I am a lawyer, and when we used to study wills, trusts, and estates, people tend to want to tell their relatives for 50,000 years what they should be able to do with their money. And they have something called a rule of perpetuity. So I don't want to get into too much legal detail, but you're right, you can't do that forever. I don't want this discussion to go away, and I did want people who differed on what I thought to be able to have an opinion, because often I'm that lone person at this Board of Aldermen voting. When you see that 28-1, that's me, okay? And as for, and I was gerrymandered and came back here because that was really ignorant what they did. I want to say to the alderman from the 23rd that I don't have a problem with people flying a Confederate flag at their own house. In fact, I would represent you if someone came to your house and told you that you could not. I don't have to like what you do, but that's your private land. Private land versus public land is something different, okay? And that is my problem. But when I was a public defender, I actually had a defendant who had burned a cross on the front yard in South St. Louis of a black family that had moved there. And I was prepared to defend him vigorously, and nobody could understand that. But I really, as an attorney, and do believe in your rights, okay? And so if you want to fly a Confederate flag, that doesn't bother me at all. That's your personal right to do that. But what the city does, and especially what people have not said, is this city is predominantly African American now. And I have said it publicly that I do not believe in any Jewish community they would let a statue of Adolf Hitler, and that's what the Confederate means to me, is that it enslaved my people, and also that it had articles of secession in which they wanted to secede from the United States of America. That's another illegal act. And when you lose, finally, you do not get to fly a victory flag with a monument, okay? So we do not fly Benedict Arnold any place around here, okay?
I would only say that I think that conflict uniquely, it's really, I avoid comparing most things to Hitler, but I think uniquely that conflict was the crucible of this country, and it still defines our lines of battle in many ways, and it's just a missed opportunity. But I totally appreciate the idea of open discussion on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner. Appreciate it. Okay. Veronica, oh, did you have, I'm sorry.
No worries. I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I've heard several people mention the fact that the mayor's not here or there are certain aldermen not here, and I just want to make sure everyone does know that there's a HUD's committee hearing that some of the aldermen are at and can't be here, and the mayor decided that it was of more importance for her to be at the community meeting about the new police chief, so I don't want people to interpret that as a lack of caring. Just there are a number of priorities that we're all trying to balance tonight.
Thank you. Okay, sure. Alderwoman, go ahead.
Thank you. And I just want to make a comment that I appreciate the history and all of this, and I think it is important to recognize history. However, when the argument of that this will only incite more attention, you also have to look at history and realize that we would never progress as a society if we don't do things that make others uncomfortable. And we will not, there's always a right and a wrong side of history. That's a reality. And we must recognize that there is a wrong side of history, and we have to progress, and we have to move on as a society, even if it does incite others, even if it is uncomfortable for us.
Very well said, thank you. All right, Veronica Page.
Hi.
All right, good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity for public comment. Well, that doesn't go down as much. I agree with Mr. Pruitt and representing the double NAACP and Alderman Kennedy in the proposal to change the Confederate Drive to Scott Joplin Lane or Drive.
That's correct.
As you can guess from my T-shirt, I'm not a St. Louis. I'm a St. Louis transplant. I've been living in St. Louis for about 1.5 years now. I'm a Tower Grove East resident, and I would just want to stand here and echoing Mr. Pruitt, Alderman Kennedy, and others in taking down the monument and renaming the drive. I've put my money where my mouth is. I've supported the GoFundMe fund to remove the monument. It's my understanding of history that, you know, when these monuments were erected, it was more or less a dog whistle to incite the reign of terror that the Klan had over the African American community. And there's been a romanticization of the Confederacy that I see, and I want to dismantle that as much as possible. And I think the resistance to take it down is just a resistance to dismantle white supremacy. There was a question earlier about where we draw the line as far as taking down buildings built by slaves and named after slaveholders. I don't believe that these should be taken down, but if we're bringing that up, let's talk reparations. And that kind of wraps up my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions of Ms. Page?
Where do you live in Tower Grove East?
At the Victor in Nebraska, near, sorry.
I
near-
know where that is. I'm your alderman.
Oh, nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. We'll talk later.
All right. Mrs. Williams, did you have a question, or? Okay. All right. Okay, we're going to bring you up next. We have Brian McClendon. He's next, and then you'll be able to come up, Ms. Williams, after that.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Brian McClellan. I'm a Dutchtown resident, and I'd like to talk about a couple relatives of mine. One was Joseph O'Neill. He helped found Forest Park. The other one was William Protzman. He was a city councilor who decided that this monument could go in place. And one of the things that he wanted to make sure of was that it was demilitarized and that there was no Confederate flag on it. Now, I've read recently that there is a little hidden Confederate flag down there. And let me say I've had these conversations have been really deep, and I feel like I've grown through this issue because it struck me as a dangerous situation, and I wanted to find a compromise. And I started having all sorts of ideas about Martin Luther King and what we could do to heal racism, but I came to the realization that that's not my job. My job is to remove this mistake, this revisionist monument, which, as has been stated, is part of a greater program. And I would like to follow the black leadership as to how to address the underlying racial problem, the racism problem. In terms of public funding, I am actually opposed to spending any public funds on this because I think it would add insult to ask the African American community to pay to have this removed after they've already paid to have it put up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Mr. McKellen?
That was pretty powerful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Joanne Williams, you're welcome to come up.
Excuse me. In 1985, I started representing the Parks and Recreation and Forestry Division employees. I retired from the Carpenters Union in 2013 from doing so, and from 1985 to 2013, I've always represented African American and Caucasian members who works at parks. And that monument has always been a bone of contention. The workers hated to work around it. They hated the symbolism of it, and symbols do matter. They matter whether we intend for them to have long-term effects or not. And the fact of the matter is that when someone has been victimized by a system, it amazes me that people who are not the victims continue to tell the victim how they should not feel about where their position is. I have absolutely no disagreement that everybody has a right to an opinion. And that opinion should not entail telling somebody how they should feel about something that impacts them. I've been a St. Louis resident for 61 years, if God lets me live to the 14th. And in my entire life, I've grown up with some of the symbols. You talk about Laclede. Well, you got Lafayette, who was a Frenchman who fought in the Revolutionary War. We sold slaves down at the courthouse. We're not talking about dismantling the courthouse. You don't dismantle buildings. Things happen all over the country. But when you erect something 50 years after an event in a place where it was not a Union city, for an army, a Confederacy that defied our Constitution. I'm a history buff too. I wanted to be a history teacher, but 2 teachers in my family told me not to because they didn't make enough money. But I love history. I spent a month in Paris, and what's interesting is that we have a country that's less than 300 years old, and that city is 2,000 years old. And they don't dismantle their history either, but they did dismantle the guillotine. You can go into Louis Castle, and you can see where Marie Antoinette stayed. They have an entire wall emblazoned with everyone who was beheaded in the guillotine, a list of them, the date that they were beheaded. And you can go and see how they had to stay, and the accommodations. If you were poor, you had straw and a bucket. If you were middle class, you had a cot and a bucket and straw. And if you were upper middle class, you had a bed and a bucket and a bowl and lighting and everything else. And so we've always treated those, even on the way to death, differently based on their economic status. And slaves did count for the South in terms of population in order to equate representation in government. And when a government allows in a public sector an erection of a monument that is counter to everything that we say constitutionally is what we stand for, is offensive to part of the citizenry, it should be removed. Now, just because people think that it erases history, it can never erase history, but when you have entire states like Texas taking Thomas Jefferson out of the history books because they were offended by the fact that he had children by a slave, then don't expect me to have somebody explain to me why I shouldn't feel concerned about a monument erected in a Union city that represented my ancestors being enslaved for the rest of their lives, and the slavery, the essence of what that represented to my people, still remains today. I agree. If you want to fly a Confederate flag on your home, that's your right. I would fight for your right to do so. I would fight for the right of the Ku Klux Klan to have a public march down city streets, because the moment that I infringe upon their rights, you infringe upon mine. I believe that we have freedoms, but freedoms do not require that people who have been subjugated to violence, to death, have to walk past a monument to that symbolism every day while they pay taxes in the same parts that people believe that it should stay there. They removed the guillotine in France because they didn't want people to remember what that symbolized. But they didn't erase the history of the guillotine because they can't do that. We can remove that monument, and it won't erase the history of the Confederacy. It won't even negate what the Daughters of the Confederacy saw. But it will go to the point, you can put a plaque in its place and say that, and once in this spot, there was a monument that was erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy in 1914, and the citizens of the city of St. Louis determined in the year of 2017 that that monument was no longer appropriate to be displayed. That commemorates the spot, commemorates the monument, and also puts forth forever our position to go forward. In the climate that we are living in today with such divisiveness, when young people, like the gentleman who shot the people in the church, say that they acted upon the fact that of the Confederate flag and they acted upon the hate, to let continual statues stay that represent the negativity of the Confederacy is inappropriate. Removing it should incite people to understand to move on, not to dwell in the past. Removing it to signify that we are moving into a new era, not staying in a past of terror and abuse. I think it's a positive thing to move on. The only thing that we have in life that stays static is nothing. Everything changes. History is always evolving. So we write the next chapter. We should not let the last chapter dictate what we do in the next chapter. It shouldn't be the end of the book either, but it certainly shouldn't be the all-encompassing narrative in that book. If we want St. Louis to represent stuff better, we talked about, when I was a kid, the Veiled Prophets Fair. For years, that was symbolic of the Klan. For years, that was symbolic of elitism. There's always been things that people have found socially offensive. But to act as if, because they existed, the people who perpetrated have the right to continue to have that monument in existence is wrong. You give me a gift, it's mine. I can do with it what I want. I can re-gift it, I can throw it away, or I can keep it. If that was gifted to us, the citizens of this city have the right to determine whether they should keep it, destroy it, or move it. I agree that there should not be any public funds utilized to do so. And I think that if you want to raise some, I have a unique way of doing that, but I won't address that here. I do think that this is the proper forum for it, because I think that race is something that has to be discussed, and that's part of our problem, the unwillingness to talk about the hard stuff. And that makes it difficult for us to get past those things. And so the more discussion that we have about those things that impede us from coming together, I think we're better served for that. That does not mean we'll walk away from the table in agreement, or that we'll all be equally satisfied with the conclusion of what we discuss. But the fact that you can discuss them and not settle our differences like we used to with guns in the middle of the street, or come to violence because we disagree, is a very good thing. If this process brings about the removal of that monument, and people have had the opportunity to have their say one way or the other, I think that's a great and admirable representation of the city. And I think that that one incident alone can bode well in how we address everything else, whether it be police, violence in our community, or et cetera. Coming to a dialogue about something that's very incisive, and coming to a conclusion that does not end up in something very negative, I think is a very good outcome. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you for coming. Anybody have any questions on Mrs. Williams, Joanne Williams? All right, thank you, Ms. Williams, we appreciate it. All righty, we're pretty much, that was our last public speaker or from the public today. We are going to have the sponsor come up, and she's going to close with the bill and explain some amendments that we're going to. Yes, sir. Okay, well, you wasn't on the list. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're here. All right. Well, let's. Okay. All right. Calm down. We're gonna let you go ahead. We're gonna give both gentlemen. Which one came in first? Come on up, sir. What's your name? State your name and your place of business and residence. And
thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mark Trout. I am the president and the chairman of the Missouri Civil War Museum.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you for having the time. I've been involved in the situation over this monument for the past year and a half, involving the committee that was formed by Mayor Slay in looking in the feasibility of removing it if it was appropriate and so forth. I don't have a say on if it stays or if it goes. My view is, for the most part, I respect the fact that the park is owned by the city of St. Louis. Monument is on the property of the city of St. Louis. I was the only institution that responded to the committee's request for proposals. I believe I was the only institution that met with the committee. And we did not submit a interpretation plan like they requested because there was no thought of putting or re-erecting this monument anytime soon. Our comments to them was basically we viewed this monument as an artifact of the Civil War era, and I was obligated by my position and my institution that I had to get involved. And so plans of an interpretation in the future that would be met by the museum in the future, be it this thing's installed or reinterpreted 10 years from now, 15 years from now, who knows. But I just want the committee to understand that I do respect the fact of the property. And if the city no longer wanted the monument, and the representatives of the city did not want that monument, I did think the appropriate place was for it to go into the hands and custody of a museum. And since this is a Civil War monument, obviously we're the best suited ones for that. It kind of fell on deaf ears, so seeing a bill in writing, Alderwoman Tyus, made my day. For the first time in almost 2 years, something is written where at least this committee stands. And it was refreshing to read this. Well written, well thought out. I can't say I agree with everything in it, but from a representative body, I was pleased with what I see, given the fact that I do respect the fact that this is the city park. It's not a battlefield, I understand that. I do invite anybody and everybody to visit these battlefields because you will see monuments to both sides and you get a different take on it. It's all about the historical setting, its location and its setting. I could go on and on about how the Grand Army felt with that monument going in 1914 because they did a written response to it. And the Grand Army met at the Jefferson Memorial, which is the History Museum. This was put in their front yard, and they did respond. And it was interesting because the gentleman back here almost went word for word about George Bailey's response, about how they viewed, they were the enemies. Their comrades died at the hands of the Confederates. And their view was almost just like this gentleman here, that they wanted those monuments there because they were a reminder, they were a milestone in the future of how far this nation has come or regressed since the great dark days of the Civil War. So that's them. I don't get involved in that issue there. Mine is historic preservation, about saving it. It seems like the breakdown, another spokesperson here mentioned the fact that we had, I believe, two mayors, that it ended with them. It never got to a representative body like this, never had a written bill proposed. And so that's where the negotiations broke down. We told them that we wanted it for years. Different representative bodies have always said that things like this, involving this defining moment in our history, belong in historical sites, appropriate historic sites, and museums, so they could be properly displayed, preserved, and protected for future generations to learn. But that kind of went to the wayside on them. And budgetary reasons, I'm just like Alderwoman Tyus mentioned, I get most of my information what I read in the paper, and half of that's wrong. It seems like then there was a monetary issue of why they did not want to give it to the Civil War Museum. First, it was we didn't give them the interpretation plan. Then number two, I hear because of monetary reasons. After that committee meeting, this city never responded to me, never made contact with me. Let's sit down and talk a little further, even though I was the only institution that was interested in this. If it's a monetary thing, bill pretty clear cut. I guess my big question for you all, who will enforce this, and is it enforceable? If it's a monetary thing, should taxpayers pay for this? Well, that's another debate. Me as a Civil War Museum in St. Louis County, we have already invested somewhere between $4 and $5 million in St. Louis County properties at Jefferson Barracks. Our gift to them. For me to raise $130,000 to save another Civil War artifact, if that's what it takes, I will do so. And I am quite confident I could do that in a matter of days. So that's the point there. But the city never responded to me in that fact, just saying that we wanted them to pay for it. And just like Mr. Pruitt said, Their proposal that they sent me from the committee specifically said, do not include budgetary information or any type of cost involving the disassembly or re-erection of transportation. That's why we didn't. So I'm not going to offer any monetary, gifts there to do it if they're telling me not to. But I am here to tell you that, number one, the Missouri Civil War Museum wants that monument. Regarding the political atmosphere about it, there's not a museum in this planet that does not have controversial, divisive, and things within their collections. It does not mean you destroy them. It does not mean, like this one gentleman said, put it in definite storage. It's always been kind of a battle cry for elected officials that these items need to be properly interpreted in museum settings, and this bill actually addresses that as well, which is great. I'm just telling the committee here, we want it. If I have to raise the funds to obtain it, I will do that and do everything the way this is written. My big thing is it going to come down to one elected official that after I raise that money and come back to you and say, all right, where do I pick it up at? They're going to say no. That's my worry. Because I can start fundraising on this, so not one penny of taxpayers' money is ever spent for that. I'll start raising that money tomorrow morning if I have to. But that's the big question. Can it be enforced?
Right. Good question. Well, we are a committee, we are a body, and I think that they will have to recognize us. If you are interested in that monument, we'd love for you to have it, especially
My
if,
proposals,
and I
the only thing
apologize
that would
for
change is the fact that I'm offering to get involved in the monetary aspect of it, where the initial proposal said, you don't want it, sign it over to me, we'll take it from there, wash your hands of it. This could have been solved a year and a half ago, but here we are, but at least now it's in the right setting.
Yeah. And I'm glad, I overlooked your name, and I apologize, and I'm glad that you're here. And, you explained to us exactly what your proposal is. Anybody have any questions of Mr. Trout?
Not so much a question.
Okay.
Wait a minute, so it's,
We'll get to you, sir. Let me go through the committee, and then, okay. All right.
Thank you. What did you say about Jefferson Barracks?
That's where our museum's located. The Missouri Civil War Museum is located in the Jefferson Barracks Historic Site. We have a 16,000 square foot Civil War museum there. It's been open about 4 years. It's been under development since 2002.
Okay, thank you.
The monument would not be erected at Jefferson Barracks, so make that clear.
'Cause
We've
I
talked
would
with-
have a problem with that.
yeah.
I have
This is
family
entirely
around.
to be
Okay.
put in protective storage till the future, till the museum someday decides what it wants to do. It
Okay.
basically gets it out of the hands of the city, so you can take care of the city.
All right, thank you.
Alderman Vaccaro?
I think it's interesting that nobody's responded to that, and that they've made such a deal out of this. When the sponsor comes up, I would ask that maybe we would put in here somehow amended to say that if the museum comes up with the money, they'd have first rights, and we can put a time limit, say, even though it's going in storage or wherever it would go, that within 6 months, you would pay to move it?
I will be honest
Something
with
like
you.
that. I mean, I want to wait for the sponsor to come up, but obviously, I think that would just solve a lot of problems, knowing that it's at least going somewhere.
That's what I thought when I responded a year and a half ago. I thought it was going to be really a clear choice right here. The city no longer wants it. It's their property. They want to give it to a museum, a Civil War museum. The headaches or whatever happens, that will be the Civil War Museum's issue. It's no longer the city of St. Louis's problem. That was the offer.
Where is the Civil War Museum at?
At Jefferson Barracks.
It's at Jefferson Barracks, but the statue wouldn't be erected there?
It will not be erected there. It will not be erected there because we are within the property of the St. Louis County parks. And we've talked with St. Louis County very, very deep in these things. Our long-term strategic plan has always been, for the last 17 years, is someday, be that 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we will be obtaining a large tract of land that a new state-of-the-art war museum and memorial will be built. And when that happens, things like this could be brought there where we would have the appropriate size and setting for that.
Okay. Okay. Alderwoman Garcia.
Thanks for being here.
Sure.
How did you find out about the hearing tonight?
The what?
How did you find out about this hearing?
I found out about this on the radio. Heard a comment on the radio. Yeah, heard a comment on
That's
the
too
radio.
bad. It's really helpful to have you here, so thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I don't want you to leave here without you giving me your card. I want to also apologize. I was planning on coming out there, and I didn't make it. But I was going to, before we had another hearing, I was going to come out there to meet you.
Okay.
I want you to know that I was told that because you were under St. Louis County Parks, that the St. Louis County people had told you that you could not have the statue. That was the misinformation that I was given. But I'm usually not satisfied with what people tell me. Everybody here can tell you that. I'm always that person that keeps digging and digging. So I would have found you, but I want to thank you for finding us, because we will have a conversation.
Well, has anybody on the panel here ever seen my only letter to that committee in response?
Not only have I don't know about them, I haven't seen the letter, I haven't seen the RFP.
Mr. Pruitt saw it. I guess that's why Mr. Pruitt, I agree with everything Mr. Pruitt said, because he saw it.
I haven't seen the RFP, I haven't seen any of it. And this is what happens again when mayors, not just Mayor Cruzen just got here, but she was the alderwoman of the 28th Ward, which Forest Park sits in for 19 and a half years. She came on the day that I had my recall election that I defeated, so I will always remember when she came here. But mayors don't want to work with the legislative body, and that's the same thing with presidents and whoever. They want to be the sole only one, and I do agree with the alderman down at the 23rd about that. We are a legislative body, and this should properly come before us. And I again want to thank you, and please don't leave without me getting a chance.
I won't. I actually wanted to speak with you in that regards. The whole information of them even knowing what St. Louis County's position was at Jefferson Barracks was because it was in my letter to them, where I talked to Mr. Bess about this in depth. And it was in my letter where we, for the very first time in public, told them about our long-term strategic plan, that we would take this and it would be put in protective storage at a facility of our choosing, out of public view until the day would be. So I'll get you a copy of all that I
Do you have a copy of the original RFP?
Sure do. Kept it all.
We're going to have a good time.
Okay, great. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Oh, wait a minute, Mr. Trout. We have one more. You have Alderman Gunther.
Sorry for making you go back and forth, but I also really just wanted to say thank you for stepping up. And right when we were about to close, the missing piece kind of fell into place here. So thank you for your offer to accept it.
Thank you for having me.
And it definitely is something that, for my constituents, a lot of them that are in favor of removing the monument also are deeply in favor of having it put into a memorial or into a museum where it would be, a recognized piece of our history. So thank you for making the offer.
We've received, even today, we've received emails and texts as far as Tel Aviv over this issue. So it's not a, being a director of a Civil War Museum, it's not a divisive hot topic unless we make it to be. It is such a popular topic. I always tell my students, I go, this is the #1 historical topic in American history and will always be. For what it was a milestone. It was the defining moment of our history, and that's why you see such compassion on both sides. But it goes to the truth. I do respect the fact that it's your property, and I believe we're the best place for that thing. So, and I would invite any of you out to the museum, because I think that was some of the questions in the committee of how am I going to interpret it. Well, the museum's been open for 4 years, so the cat's out of the bag. Come see how we display in our museum there, what we do with our limited things. The only sculpture and outdoor monument that we have in place that has been authorized is actually a larger-than-life size bronze sculpture of Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. That's what's on the museum grounds as of this date right now. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so glad that we got a chance to let you speak, Mr. Trout. Look, we really ran over time. I'm sorry, young man. We just, I'm going to have the sponsor come up. It's almost 8:15. We clerk is already in.
Wait, Frank, give him 2 minutes.
All right,
Sir.
2 minutes. Come on now. Come on.
No, don't put him out, sir.
Have him come up for 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's all right.
We got 2 minutes.
You got 1.5 minutes. Come on up, buddy.
That's all I need. Everybody's up here talking about history
and everything else. My family has been here since the beginning, dying and fighting for everybody's rights here. Everybody. During the Civil War, my mother's family came over here as the Irish on boats, were handed rifles and uniforms and taught to fight and die without knowing why. So for me not to be able to speak, I get upset. I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't see your name up, and on the list, and I apologize. But we ran over, and so you finished?
Being a veteran, I find this to be offensive, extremely offensive. I understand that it's a race issue, and there's a lot of people that are offended by it, but you have to see it from a veteran's standpoint. You have to see it from our standpoint as well. This is history. This is American history. These men fought for their country, whether we agree with what they did or not. I fly a Confederate flag in my house, in front of my house, with an American flag in South City in Tower Grove. Not because I'm a racist, not because I agree with what the Confederacy did. I do it because I love this country and I respect our history. Everybody should. We do not memorialize veterans because they were morally superior people. In fact, there are plenty of morally reprehensible people in military cemeteries around the world, but we do recognize the costly service these people gave in an effort much bigger than themselves. This is why, for ages, military veterans have been able to honor those who fought against them. I will make a distinction. Honoring a Confederate general is not the same as memorializing a Confederate soldier, a Confederate veteran. And these are veterans, whether they were Confederates or Union. They were all granted immunity. They are veterans. They are protected as any other veteran in this country and deserve the same amount of respect. I sympathize with those who question the appropriateness of monuments to Confederate greatness today, but those who would deface memorials to dead soldiers need to realize that the war is over. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm not trying to be less understanding towards your feelings. I'm not. It's simply hateful and ugly to deny these men their remembrance. Just as hateful and ugly as the things that were done to African Americans here. Just as hateful and ugly as the things that were done when the Irish came over here and were forced to fight forced to build the railroads. The Irish have been persecuted just as long. All over the world. You think I'm joking? Look at history. Look at history. You think I'm joking. Look at the Jews just as well. Like, it's not a joke. It's not a game. I'm not playing.
Running out of time. Yeah, so let's go.
End. You gonna ask to change the name of Shoto Street because she owned slaves and shot her head slave?
No.
Because she thought he was running away when he was bringing in runaways, giving them rum so she could resell them back to the South?
No.
Do we forget the fact that Missouri was the third largest seller of slaves to the South?
Okay. It's history.
It's history. You
Right.
can't sweep it under the rug.
No, nobody's trying to sweep it.
This thing and throwing it off somewhere is not going to do anything.
But you can go to the History Museum in Forest Park, and they have a lot of memorabilia of the Confederacy. They have documentation of the Confederacy. So nobody's trying to sweep anything under the rug, just as well as they have the Union soldiers in there. All we're saying is that this is a monument that needs to be removed because it's a volatile situation. No, wait, hold on. Let me say something.
The cap of it without the bill even being passed,
It's
which violates federal law.
It's a very volatile situation. Now, you have police officers here. They have to take out their time. Listen up. Listen, son. Wait a minute. Just listen to it.
$130,000 that you're going to use could go to help these men do their job.
Well, we don't want to waste their time out there on that monument in Forest Park because we would rather have them solving crimes throughout the city of St. Louis. So it's a waste of time. So we appreciate it.
So we can
Thank
waste
you.
money
That's
so
it.
they can't get the funds
I ain't
they need
gonna
to do their
argue.
job.
It's not,
All right.
it's not public taxpayer money that we're talking about.
I don't know where the money's coming
Come
from.
on.
Well, the point of it was that it's not taxpayer.
We'd like to hear from the sponsor. Thanks for coming, sir. Have a good day. Okay, we're already running over time, so we're going to have the sponsor go ahead and close out. So we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I know this is taken out from everybody's time to be here in this evening, but I do appreciate the opportunity for all people to speak, pro or con. I just want to address this last person who just spoke for a moment. The name Tyus is actually from Irish. I was on the radio a few days ago, and I talked about why I wanted this monument to come down. And one of the things people said, well, what if this was one of your ancestors? So I went to Ancestry.com, and I looked up Tyus from Tennessee. And they have a military record. And of the Tyuses listed, all of them fought for the Confederate, except for one. My grandfather was half white, and so my great-grandfather was a Confederate soldier. I still want it to come down. I want you to understand. He was an Irish Confederate soldier. I want you to hear me. So, and I still want it to come down. I actually brought some handouts for the committee because I have some proposed amendments. I made these before I heard the second to the last gentleman. So I really would like to speak to him about some perhaps other amendments, but I would like to give the committee copies of my proposed amendments. It's 2 pages. I just made a lot. And then I also brought an article that was dated October 16th, 2015, when the current mayor was the alderwoman of the 28th Ward, and when we first started talking about removing these Confederate monuments and changing the Memorial Drive to a different name. It's also the time that we approved the Downtown Soldiers Memorial be given over to the History Museum. And the alderman from the 23rd is right in that, and I agree, we need legislation to do this kind of things. And so I want to commend the mayor on her commitment to take the Confederate statue down, but I really would caution her, since she has her lobbyists here, if he would talk to her about if we just all work together. It may be a little slower than what she would want, but it might get to a place where everybody feels comfortable that the legislative body had a chance to work, and also we realize her leadership in helping to get this down. I brought a copy of the article that Mr. Pister wrote back a couple of years ago. I just wanted to say that Board Bill 37 does not attempt to disrespect any veterans. My family members are veterans. I've told this committee this before. I had 4 uncles serve in different military installations. I also had my own sister served 23 years in the Air Force. And in fact, she retired up in Washington, so she was there for 23 years. My family, I have several cousins. We are a military family. Because I am a military family, going out to Forest Park and actually seeing a Confederate monument was very upsetting to me. The military that I know do not honor, and when I say honor, they don't put up monuments to losers. I've said this before, there's no place that I find that they have a monument to Hitler. He was a loser. His cause was a losing cause. It was not an honorable cause. Benedict Arnold, if you really want to do a comparison, he fought with the Continental Army back when we were revolutionaries and we broke from England. And he started out fighting for the freedom of the United States and ended up going and working with the British to keep us part of the British colonies. We don't honor Benedict Arnold. We did not put this statue or monument up at a time when the war occurred. We didn't put it up as something that happened. We put this monument up as a way to intimidate black people when civil rights was going on, as a way to show that there was still white superiority. And at the time that that was put up, black people didn't have any kind of rights to say, no, this should not happen. And as recently as 1960, with a 50-year anniversary, they celebrated this. And when I read in history that when they were putting this monument up, they were playing Wish I Was in Dixie. And I was born in Tennessee, but I don't wish I was in Dixie during the time of slavery, okay? I'm glad that I was not born at that time. So when I wrote this, and I did write it myself, I wrote this with a lot of things in mind. One of them is that I didn't grow up in St. Louis. I'm here because my husband, who's here out in the audience, loved his hometown and wanted to come back here. We met in college, wanted to come back here and work on things in North St. Louis. It's when I first heard about North St. Louis, I didn't grow up in a town where there was different parts of a town. It was a town, but I got here and it was a north and a south and a central quarter. And I've lived in all three. Lived in the Central West End, lived in South St. Louis, and then lived in North St. Louis. And, but when just sometimes when you let something that's perpetuating a false narrative stand, people start to take that as that's the right thing to do. I did that with the Robert E. Lee that was downtown. When I looked up Confederate monuments, they list the Robert E. Lee boat as a Confederate monument. I've been on there to eat. That appalls me because I didn't know any better. And so I let that just slide by. When people get used to things, they don't, that monument out there doesn't say, let me tell you about the history. Let me tell you about slavery. Let me tell you how horrible that is. Let me tell you that the vestiges of slavery are still ongoing to this day. It's like we are just celebrating that our people went off to war. That is not a true narrative of what happened. When the former alderwoman, current mayor, brought the bill in a couple of years ago, I brought this situation up at that time because it was very disturbing to me. And it's also very disturbing to me to hear about that we've had committees formed that this Board of Aldermen was not invited to be a part of, that they made decisions that we don't know, that there's RFPs being put out that we don't know, that there were somebody that wants to take this, but we've never been told. I always believe that the Board of Aldermen should exercise its powers. You know, you all know me as being a person who believes in the rules, okay? And one of our rules, the way our city is set up, we're supposed to have a strong Board of Aldermen and a weak mayoral system. The way that the mayor gets to be, and it's not Alderwoman Cruzen's fault, because I also have to fault Mayor Slay, because he put this commission together and then didn't talk to us. I was on Parks 2 years ago. So we never heard anything about that. That's very upsetting to me. Saying all of that, we now have heard from someone who says that they want the monument. So these proposed amendments that I have, I don't want to have the bill heard. I want you to take a chance to look at it and maybe now sponsor some other amendments. That was why I brought it to the Parks Committee and why I wanted us to have hearings. I didn't want this to be a bill about Sharon Tyus. I wanted this to be a joint bill with Parks Committee. I'm also very thankful for the young people who put their name on it. When I say young, I also mean newer older people, and I'm glad that it's black and white, because the way you solve issues is you don't just have all black people, you don't have all white people. We all have to be committed together to figure out how we go forth. I also want to address people who are scared about, will we change other things? Yes, things in the future will get changed because we don't have control of the future. When we're dead and gone, some younger person might decide they don't like Jefferson, and they may sponsor a bill to change Jefferson. And you know what? That's all right, because we don't have a right to control the future. That's what the young people come along to do, because they have a right to control their future and to make changes. And as you get older, you sometimes don't want to do change. Change is good. I'm sorry that I missed 10 years at this Board of Aldermen, but I'm so pleased to see all these different faces that have such progressive thoughts and willing to challenge things, that I feel like I'm honored to be back at this board with the people who are willing to change, not agree with me. I don't need anybody to agree with me. I'm married to an oldest child, and we disagree on everything, but we've been together 42 years, okay? Just to be able to challenge and not be scared to face these issues. And I think this is what this board bill does. It attempts to face this issue. It asks all of us to put on our thinking caps and to look at what is the best way to do this. I would like to bring, if the mayor wants to sit down with us or her staff and answer these, because it's very troubling from what's been testified here. I would want that. I do want the monument to come down, me personally, but I want it to come down in a way that the greater amount of citizens who live in the city of St. Louis feel like that they were part of the body, if not through actual testimony, through their representatives at the Board of Aldermen. And with that, and I wanted to also address the Scott Joplin Drive. There has been some talk that they may try to vacate Scott Joplin. I have, one of my amendments says that if they vacate Scott Joplin, that we rename another roadway in the park Scott Joplin, because I think what really made me sad, and I gave you all these maps, if you didn't have a chance, go look at them. There's all kind of things that we address in this park, but it's as if African Americans don't live in this city. Particularly, I want to bring out Norman K. Probstein Golf Course. The alderwoman from the 28th, who is currently the mayor, brought that bill through the board when I was here before. And he paid a lot of money, and he wrote his board bill so that we can never change this, okay? But when you look here, you got Dwight Davis Tennis Center, you got all these things, Faulkner Drive, but no black people exist. That is a false narrative of St. Louis, okay? So if you're wanting everything to stay the same, what you're saying is at a time when black people didn't have a right to even have any input, that we're just going to keep it the way it was. That can't be if we're ever to have a city that's inclusive. And that's why I wrote this. It wasn't to hurt or disrespect veterans, because my families are veterans. It is to say this is there's a more proper place to put it. I'm supportive of that, and I'm so happy to hear somebody say that they can raise the money and do it. And I hope the mayor, and maybe there's another side we haven't heard from the mayor of why they didn't want to do it, but I want to hear that. I want to hear from her. I want to hear from the committee, because I looked up that committee. I want to talk to Mr. Roth, who still works for the city, as to why that wasn't implemented and why they didn't tell us about that. So I still don't want it passed, and it's not because I don't think I have the votes. It's because I want it to be a fair way to pass a bill that everybody feels like, even if it's not their way, that they had adequate time to have input into it.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate it. Alderwoman, I know we have one question from Alderman Vaccaro.
It's not a question.
Or a statement.
It's more to do with the process, and we both agree. Because we're busy trying to debate whether or not we should outsource our airport, yet I find out on the news that Mayor Slay secretly signed papers not coming in front of us. And I think I've asked this over and over. Why even have a Board of Aldermen if we're not going to do the right thing and the process isn't going to follow the right process? Because at the end of the day, it's just getting more and more and more where we're, and what we should be doing is not out there. I learned a lot tonight, especially from the group at the end, that it's going to be a lot easier to go out to my constituents that are more in favor of keeping it there than not, to say, there's a place that this can go in a museum. I think it's less diversive. I think that that's why we are a group that can sit down and listen. I think whenever you get a group of yes people surrounded by you, because if I appoint a committee of my friends, they're going to do what I ask. It's not diverse. We do fight. We do argue, and we don't all agree with each other. And you know that. Sometimes we're with each other, sometimes we're against each other. But that's what the voters of the city of St. Louis want. And like I said, again, I got to find out on the news that was signed already to put us in a thing to basically lease out our airport. All these things just frustrate me. I get extremely mad about it. And whether the statute stays, I think because we have a better process, we now can go to our constituents and say, this thing can go to the museum, that there was money out there. All this secret nonsense that goes on behind the door, we're not over there. Where's the transparency that should go on? And again, this is one thing, and I respect you, and we would absolutely agree on, that I'm almost getting tired, and this was not Mayor Cruz, and I admit this was Mayor Slay, but again, I have to find out in the news that we're considering outsourcing the airport, but the mayor has a whole staff of people trying to talk directly to the mayor. Good luck. They have a whole staff of people that will answer the phone, yet almost everybody has their alderman's phone number. Over the statute, I've received probably about 100 calls in the last couple of days. Over the airport, I've probably received even more. And then I look like a fool because I'm going, well, I didn't even know we were doing that. It's just absolutely wrong. And I'm sorry, I said I was going to stay sharp, but it's absolutely wrong when this group is disrespected And again, this is not against Mayor Cruzen, but I'm telling you, when I got to find out in the news that we've decided to lease out the airport, it's wrong, and the people are not being properly represented.
Alderman, I'm going to
Okay.
respond. Can I respond and tell you that I learned something from Alderman McGuire, who was the previous alderman of the 28th before Lyda Cruzen. If you can count to 15, you can get your vote. And if you can count to 20, it doesn't make a difference what the mayor says. That's what I'll reply to. Because 20 aldermen outweigh the mayor.
So.
Okay,
which
that's
one-
it, Joe, that's it.
I just want to know
That's it,
which
Joe.
one of the
Joe,
aldermen.
Joe. All right, now look, we'll go ahead and have another meeting, and we'll let you know next week, and then hopefully we'll get together and we'll be able to pass this bill out. Our meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone, for coming.